Heraclitus, a little flick. Here he comes on the far post. Socrates is there. Socrates, there it is. Socrates has scored. The Greeks are going mad. The Greeks are going mad. Socrates scores. The beautiful cross from Archimedes. The Germans are disputing it. Hegel is arguing that the reality is merely an a priori adjunct of non-naturalistic ethics. Kant, by the categorical imperative, is holding that ontologically exists only in the imagination, and Marx is claiming it was offside. But Confucius has answered them with the final whistle. It's all over. Germany, having trounced England's famous midfield trio, Bentham, Lock and Hobbs in the semi-final, have been beaten by the odd goal. And let's see it again.
That was Monty Python. We are the Football Philosophers. My name is Dominic Peters, a.k.a. the Walmart Draco Malfoy. I am joined today by my partner in crime, the better half, the more good-looking half, Anay Patel. Anay, good to be with you.
I'm so flattered. It is always great to be with the Walmart Draco Malfoy. It's great to see you online. It sucks we can't meet in person, but hey, we're making the best of it. Starting a little podcast.
Yeah, no, I feel like I have transcended from a white boy to a white man starting a podcast. So no, I'm super excited about this. I think this is something we've wanted to do for a while, and the stars aligned, and here we are.
Yeah, it's cool. We've got a lot of free time on our hands now, so might as well make the most of it. Learn some more about football and see what we can see.
Absolutely.
So before we get into the show, we should probably introduce ourselves to you all that probably don't know us too well. Hopefully throughout this experience, you'll get to know us a little better throughout our discussions as well, and we get to know you. So Dom, you want to get things started?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I'm born and raised in the Bay Area, in the South Bay, and I grew up playing soccer. I come from a tall family. My dad's 6'10", some of his relatives even taller. So it was an odd choice that I chose soccer over basketball, but it's one that I don't regret for sure. I joined the Quakes Academy when I was 15 years old, and graduated high school with the Quakes Academy. Now I'm at Wake Forest University. I'm a goalkeeper there. I'm studying philosophy and politics, and I just continue to study the beautiful game. I think that's so important that we look at ourselves as students of the game, and never stop learning. So this is another opportunity to continue to learn and hopefully to talk about some things to other people who are like-minded individuals. I am rocking my Swansea City kit today. Unfortunately, I'm a Swansea supporter. If you don't know, they're in the Championship, the second division in England. They're a Welsh club from the southern part of Wales. Yeah, how about you? Tell me about yourself.
Yeah, no, like you said at the end there, I just love learning more about the game, being a student of the game. This sport is so fascinating in the way that it touches so many people in different ways, in positive ways. And yeah, I also grew up in the Bay Area, born and raised here in the South Bay, about 10 minutes from you, as you know. I just graduated from USC studying computer science and business administration down in LA. And I've always been a massive soccer fan, first and foremost, and I also played up until around high school, which is when I stopped playing. But weirdly, it's when I started watching it a lot more and really getting more into writing about soccer and just studying the game a lot more, I guess. When I was at USC, I started coaching a team of USC students. It was actually a student-run team. We competed in the UPSL this spring, which unfortunately got cut short by this pandemic. But that was a really cool project and learned a lot about coaching and how that kind of works at the lower level in this country. I also worked for the San Jose Earthquakes as an intern in 2018 on the technical staff, working on video analysis and analytics. And that's kind of my main area of focus that I'm interested in, is sports management and how we can incorporate things like data science and machine learning into that process.
Cool. So for the people who are watching, Anay and I have known each other for a few years. We actually met during the 2014 season, which was probably the worst season for the San Jose Earthquakes of all time. So you can't say that nothing good didn't come out of that season. But recently we became better friends and started sharing football analysis. And I think we're transcending our friendship into a podcast now, which is a beautiful thing.
Love to see it. Taking the next steps.
Yeah, absolutely. Anay, you touched on your interest in football. Mine are similar, but mine also speak to more of the social and political realms of the game, I should say. I think that the use of football as a soft power and even a hard power in some cases is just absolutely fascinating. It really is the world's game, and is viewed in a positive way, but also negative ways. I mean, we talk about international development. We talk about football as a liberating and unifying force. There are so many elements to the game that oftentimes we don't talk about. So I'm really, really looking forward to exploring these topics with you during this podcast.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's kind of one of the overlaps we have in terms of interest as well. For me, particularly, something that really interests me is supporters and ultras culture
Mm.
in soccer, which is obviously not as prominent here in the States, but it's kind of so embedded into different parts of society in places like Europe and South America, where they control so much of, you know, the narrative and the just everything around the club in general. Um, like I mentioned earlier, I'm interested in applying computer science and data science to soccer and sports management. And you know, a few of the managers that I like to admire, I'd say, are Bielsa, Guardiola, Klopp, and Sarri in particular in recent times as well.
Yeah, all good picks there. If you don't know, Ane is unfortunately a Liverpool fan.
That's right.
So I guess this
I
is
forgot
proof
to
that
mention.
that different supporters of different clubs can coexist, and there's some bipartisanship somewhere at least.
I'd say my first club though is definitely the San Jose Earthquakes.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
that's the
Go
most
Quakes.
important part, really.
Go Quakes. Well, during this podcast, we expect to have some really, really good guests, from friends to players to coaches to analysts. And we're really looking forward to making this not just a 1 week thing, but a consistent podcast that you can listen at home or hopefully in the future on your way to your job when this quarantine ends.
Yeah, we think it'll be a great way to fill our time, fill your time, and hopefully learn more as individuals and as a group, and hopefully share kind of the stories that we've picked along the way over the last few years of, you know, working in and around football. And also, obviously, I think between the two of us, we've met a lot of really cool people through this sport, and they have a lot of stories to tell as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I would be remiss to not mention that philosophy is going to play some role into this podcast. I'm a philosophy major, hence our name, the football philosophers. But that can transcend philosophy into so many different categories. And today we're going to be talking about the Bundesliga. Obviously, everyone knows that the Bundesliga returned to action this weekend. Very exciting for football fanatics. And I think Ane can agree that we were both very excited to hear that it was returning.
Oh yeah, definitely a reason to wake up before 10 a.m.
Yeah. So we're going to be going over the league as a whole, perhaps the new league changes, review the first weekend, talk about the Americans that you might be more familiar with that are in the league, and basically review what has happened in the past couple of weeks and how it relates to soccer. From there, we're going to be bringing in the MLS a little bit, and ask ourselves, can we see the MLS making a similar like return to the Bundesliga?
So no episode would be complete without a guest. And what a guest we have today. Today we're lucky enough to be joined by someone I'm sure many Quakes fans know, Colin Entire. Colin is the host of the Aftershock podcast and a longtime contributor to Quakes Epicenter, as well as a general soccer analyst and commentator. Colin, welcome. Thank you for having us.
Hey, Dom, it's a pleasure and an honor.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell the audience that may not know you too well a little bit more about yourself and you know what brings you here?
Well, I was a Bay Area kid, originally a Quakes fan for, since the 90s and the Quakes 1.0, as it were, back in the D-Row, Donovan era. That was my childhood. But by 2015, I kind of wanted to get into journalism in general. So I thought the best place for me to start was soccer journalism. There wasn't, in my opinion, enough coverage about the Quakes at the time, and it's kind of a built-in audience that I thought I could do a good job for. So in 2015 and 2016, I covered the club, pretty full time. Did a fair amount on it. I had the Aftershock. I wrote for football.com for a while. I wrote for Quakes Epicenter, Centerline Soccer, all that, covering the Quakes. I eventually got a job in the 2016 campaign and moved out to the East Coast. I'm now here in Washington, so I'm far away from my beloved Quakes. And now I work at a private equity firm, and I do sustainable investing, which has literally nothing to do with that. But my life has worked out. It's definitely a better paying field than sports journalism, even in the best of times. But of course, in the time of COVID, we're in the time, the worst of times. But still a passionate footy fan. I'm still a passionate philosophy fan. I spent a year in grad school of philosophy before I dropped out. So I'm ready to go.
Cool. Well, I think I can speak for everyone when we say we're happy that you're able to do a lot of your soccer commentary and analytics work, even though you are not necessarily in the Bay Area and next to the Quakes. Something else that people might know about Colin or not know about him is that he is a Dominic Kinnear era center defensive mid on our Quakes Pro Clubs team. And I just want to highlight that Colin has the highest pass completion on our Pro Clubs team at 80%. We are very lucky to have you not only on this podcast, but on our team as well.
What the completed passes are not what get me excited, Dom. It's anytime we win the ball back.
Yeah, and that's what makes you a Dominic Kinnear era center mid there. Today we're talking about the Bundesliga, and we've heard that you have chosen a team to support. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, so first of all, I'm still playing the field. These are early days. We're not going to, you don't get married to the first person you meet necessarily. One of our good mutual friends, Dan Mason, is an SC Freiburg fan, and it's this little town in the Black Forest in southwestern Germany. It's a nice kind of, he describes it as something like a Santa Cruz equivalent. Decent weather, pretty chill, hippie kind of atmosphere. And Freiburg is a small club. It's not, one of the German powerhouses. But it can occasionally, reach a little bit above its station to have some success. They've been in European competition a couple times here and there. And they have a coach, Christoph Streich, if I get that right, who's very well loved in Germany. That's kind of like a cult figure. So I was like, all right, small town club, kind of a hippie town, good enough to have some results. Right now they're in 7th in the Bundesliga. They're 1 point away from the European places, I think. So they have some upward mobility, but they could just as easily be in the 2nd Bundesliga in a year or two. So kind of not dissimilar to Swansea in some ways, I don't think. But that's definitely the one I'm centering in on for now. Honestly, there's a lot of other clubs I like. I think that we're going to mention some of the other ones that I enjoy later on. So, but Freiburg's what I'm rooting for now.
Cool. Yeah, that's good stuff. Not a bad result over the weekend too. So
yeah, they took a point off of Leipzig and might have actually taken all 3, not for a marginal offside called back in VAR. Honestly, not the sexiest team. If you're talking to like which Bundesliga teams excite me tactically, it's probably not Freiburg. But football is about more than just the X's and O's, and it's more about than the table. It's about identity, emotion, feeling.
And I think we see a lot of that emotion in a league like the Bundesliga, where the ultras play a key part in every team's success, really. 2 teams that I kind of wanted to touch on that I am fond about, that I think I would agree with. We're still in the dating arena.
Yeah, we're still dating.
I myself am dating 2 teams, I guess. The first one being Frankfurt. Swansea fans will remember him quite well as a key contributor to Swansea's time in the Premier League. He is no longer playing first team football all too often with Frankfurt, but that's the kind of the guy that got my attention. Frankfurt also played decent footy the last few years. However, I will say that their weekend performance was very much unlike that. You saw a lot of building from the back that ended with just whipping in crosses from everywhere in the final third. So they're going into a little bit of a drought. I think every Frankfurt fan would agree with that, but certainly one to keep an eye on. And then the second club I wanted to mention is Union Berlin. I think this is a club that we all can agree that epitomizes what football is all about. They're one of the only East German clubs to be in the top flight. They play really, really blue-collar football, where much of their squad comes from these lower 2nd and 3rd leagues in Germany. But they all come together and they play as one. They have definitely overperformed, I think, the people's expectations being the last promoted club. They had to go through that playoff run where they had to beat the third to last place team in the Bundesliga to be promoted, and they did such, and now are, to their standards, going through a very successful season. Fun fact about one of their players, Neven Subotic was a center back for Dortmund. Many of you will remember him. Back in the day, he actually played college soccer at University of South Florida. He now plays for Union Berlin. So I just think that's a cool little tidbit.
I could do you one better here. Neven Subotic actually played for the U.S. national teams as a youngster because he came over here younger.
That he did.
Now, look, some of these nationality battles are more real than others. This one, he always wanted to play for Serbia, and he was going to wait for that. That's the country of his birth and where he's raised. But he did come over to the U.S. for a while and was in the Bradenton program for the U.S. national team. So add that to the list of the ones that got away. US.
Yeah. One that we don't talk about a lot too. And he has such actually a interesting story of how he came to the United States and how his career developed because of that. So if you're looking for a Wikipedia page to search up, definitely recommended him.
The good news about soccer dating here is that it's, just because I'm dating Union Berlin doesn't mean that you can't as well. Hopefully we can both end up with them, because that's absolutely on the list as well. This is their first season ever in the top division of the combined, unified German soccer league. They're very much a community club. Their fans raised money to cover expenses during a particularly bad year in the fourth division a while back. Awesome. And they actually had a really brave performance against Bayern over the weekend. So
they did. If you really want to get emotional, you can search up their promotion victory last season. You see the fans storming the field, the ultras lifting up the players, lighting off flares. I think that brings a smile to every football fan's eyes.
I'll give my last pitch for Union Berlin, which is that in the East German League, their great rivals were the team that was kind of affiliated with the German secret police, the Stasi.
Yep.
And so they were kind of considered the anti-establishment team in East Germany. So if you like that kind of ethos to your club, Union Berlin is for you. It's also got a cute little stadium. And Berlin's a great town. Why not? And what's not to like?
Yeah, that's definitely a really exciting club and always a great story in terms of having a club that's so in touch with the community. I'm going to introduce a team that's probably not going to be on the same page as that. It's a team that I follow closely but don't necessarily love. It's RB Leipzig. And for those of you that don't know, the Bundesliga has the 50+1 rule where the club has to have majority voting rights with the fans. And so RB Leipzig is essentially owned by the Red Bull Corporation that own New York Red Bulls and RB Salzburg. They bought a lower division team back in 2009 and brought them up through the ranks. And now they compete with the best in the Bundesliga. And because they're so quote unquote corporate, they're in a way breaking a norm in German football. They have a lot of people that, dislike them, a lot of protests in the games that they play. But on the other hand, they have a consistently fantastic style of play on the pitch, as many of the other Red Bull teams do. They've had some seriously great names on their technical staff, from Ralf Rangnick to Ralf Hasenhüttl to now Julian Nagelsmann, one of the most exciting German managers, young German managers, in my opinion. And also Jesse Marsch, actually, as an assistant for a short period of time before he joined Salzburg as their manager. So that's another kind of piece of news that's exciting for American fans. Who knows, Jesse Marsch may be the next in line for that job. In addition to that, there's Tyler Adams, who has had some injuries with his time at RB Leipzig, but the fact that he's in that position, that same position that Naby Keita was in just a couple of years ago, is really exciting for American soccer fans too. And I think once he starts to get some consistent minutes, that's going to be a player to watch and a club to watch. Definitely not the club that I'm supporting or dating, as you guys are putting it. But definitely a team that's worth, just observing, keeping an eye on.
Totally agree. I mean, honestly, so Leipzig, I'm going to feel, from a moral perspective, feels icky. It's the opposite of the Union Berlin experience, but tactically and technically is an extraordinary watch.
Fans of the Premier League might have heard Julian Nagelsmann's name be thrown around recently, especially with the overtaking of Newcastle he is a manager that is touted to be maybe the next in charge of Newcastle. So again, if you are a Premier League supporter or fan, keep your eye on him because you might see him next year in the Premier League.
He's only a couple years older than me, by the way.
Yep, he started real young because he had a career-ending knee injury, I believe. I think around when he was 19 years old. He was destined to go pro, but that kind of put that kind of ruined his chances. But it seems like he's done a good job of turning his career around.
So in a couple of years, can we expect you, Colin, at Red Bulls?
I don't think I'd have the patience for the tactical element. I'm much more likely to be the back office guy who's wheeling and dealing in the transfer market than I am a guy on the touchline, I think.
But that's the only reason why. Of course they'd want you.
He's a football manager expert. Another fun fact about Colin.
I do spend probably too much of my time on that.
So Colin, with the return of the Bundesliga, we've seen some changes, dramatic changes such as people not in stands. But can you talk to us a little bit more about some of the rule changes that have occurred?
Sure. Honestly, the one that is most interesting to me is the 5 substitutions rule. One of the interesting things, I think that people forget that there weren't even 3 substitutions in most professional leagues until a couple decades ago. It was actually fairly recent. I think it was around the 1990 era that you had 3. And if you wind the clock back another 3 decades before that, there weren't any substitutions. Whatever your starting 11 was is the 11 that were expected to finish the match, including if they broke their leg and you were just out of luck and you were down a man. So the addition of substitutions over time has actually dramatically changed the game, partially because it allows managers to change the tactics. And I can imagine ways in which having a 4th and 5th substitution would allow a more aggressive change or more varied change over time. But the other reason I'm interested in it, and obviously it's being done now because the fitness levels weren't necessarily going to be as high, and we weren't sure how that was going to be handled by the players physically. But analytics people have kind of always suggested that substitutions in general are too infrequent and not early enough. Because substitutes during their minutes on the pitch are actually really impactful. They typically generate quite a lot of positive, game actions, even though theoretically they're the less talented players because they're getting less play time. They're not making the starting lineup. So I think that if coaches use this as an excuse to kind of make earlier and earlier substitutions, then we might actually see some interesting tactical wrinkles. We see more substitutions at halftime. More at 50 minutes, 55, 60, and fewer at 80. One of the things that frustrated me about old school managers and my formerly beloved Dominic Kinnear is that his hesitation to go with earlier substitutions. So I think that that's one of the ones I'm going to be really paying attention to.
You mentioned that substitutions are more likely to have an effect on the game when put in. Is there any analysis to show that there is a difference between substitutions being put in at 50 minutes compared to 80 minutes and perhaps their impact? Because that also adds an interesting wrinkle to the rule.
I will be honest, I don't remember off the top of my head, and I may, if you remember, but my understanding was that the earlier they're put on, just that effect of having a sub on just contributes to a wider swath of minutes. So perhaps it's diminished if it's a 30-minute run out where you presumably, you can't just be in a full sprint for that entire 30 minutes, but still that 30-minute run out, you can have more impact pound for pound than you can if you're over the 90.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that as well. And I think another thing that's interesting that I don't know too much about, but it's still kind of something that could be a thing, is that the sports science element of it, whether leaving that substitute to the 85th minute versus the 75th minute could have a significant impact on whether or not the player gets injured or increases the risk or decreases the risk of injury. So perhaps that's another reason why we could see the substitution rule expanded even beyond this COVID-19 rule change.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. The substitution rule is not set in stone and has changed throughout time, and I wouldn't be surprised, that even though the purists might say that completing the 90 has some kind of virtue and players obviously want to compete for the full 90. I think that the more that coaches and sports scientists say, hey, if you guys want us to play 2 games a week for 35 consecutive weeks, you might want to give us more substitutions.
Yeah, I think a counterpoint to that could be an argument based upon the lines of maybe this disrupts the game too much.
Sure.
I'm coming from a college soccer background where it's not 5 substitutions; it's unlimited
Yep.
substitution,
Right. Yeah.
where you see teams constantly be able to press us for 90 minutes because they put 3 forwards in for 1 minute and then they take them out and put 3 different ones in. And while I don't think 5 substitutions will necessarily disrupt the game in the same way, it certainly is something to think about. And I think this is why the rule is 5 substitutions in 3 instances.
Yeah.
So you're only able to sub 3 times during the whole match, even though you have 5 substitutions.
I mean, honestly, there's a lot of solutions to that problem if it gets there. In the NCAA, I always thought that they should do live hockey style, subs where the game wouldn't necessarily stop. It, if you're going to be doing that constant interchange,
Yeah.
perhaps you have 3 set breaks that are done at set, dead ball situations, but beyond those 3, either way, I'm sure this is not necessarily an imminent thing, but I think that for now, we can be contented that they're only having the 3 dead ball stops.
Yeah, certainly something to think about. I think one other thing I wanted to bring up that we see with this new change is perhaps a diminishing effect on home field advantage. Especially in the Bundesliga, we see that teams perform by far greater at home than they do away. And I think there are many reasons why this happens. I think, first of all, fans is a huge reason. And this is the part that's going to be missing, is that there's going to be no fans at these games. People could argue that traveling, knowing your field conditions, all these things play a role. But I think most people would agree that having fans behind your back, behind the referee's back, plays a large role. And if you look at the stats, for example, Frankfurt, they have the 6th best record in the league if you played all games at home. They'd be fighting for a Champions League position. However, as of now, they have the worst league record for away games. They're 2-1-9. They'd be relegated if they played all their games away. It's going to be interesting to see if home games are going to be treated more like away games now for every team. Obviously, playing at Frankfurt Stadium is not going to be the same at playing at another stadium, but they do lack that fan support. And I mean, we saw Frankfurt lose this weekend pretty embarrassingly at home. I don't even know if it's fair to say that they lost at home when they don't have the support that they get at home usually right now.
Yeah, I'm of 2 minds of this. One is, between the 3 of us, I'm sure we played a lot of youth sports games in front of no crowd at all, or very little crowd, or just our families.
Mm-hmm.
But even those, honestly, it feels like there is a home advantage present, and that has more to do with the travel, more to do with the conditions of the particular field that you're on, and those kind of more subtle advantages, or even just the comfort of being able to go back to your house and sleep in your own bed rather than be in a hotel or whatever it is. The other thing, though, the thing about the fans that I'm aware of from the analytical research is it seems to be that the effect is on the referees.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you have a stadium full of people screaming about every call, obviously they think every call is going against them, that it exerts just a very subtle influence on referees. And soccer is a sport that is so sensitive to officiating tendencies because they can really make or break a game. The referees are of very high quality and they're never overtly biased. I think that, that kind of idea is overplayed. But having 60,000 people screaming at you every time you call against their team, it's very difficult to completely tune that down. So I think that's actually something I'd be interested to see if the numbers, when they come in, suggest that the officiating is more neutral home and away for a team than it is in normal circumstances.
Yeah. No, it's tough to differentiate what it really is. But hopefully this time and this league play under COVID conditions will tell us a little bit more about that.
I actually have another theory, by the way, that the officiating will get just a tiny bit sharper. And that's because there is actually a certain amount of calls that you can make by sound that you can't make, that certainly can't hear in a major stadium environment with 60,000 people in the Westfalenstadion in Dortmund or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just talking like you can tell whether somebody's touched a ball as it's going out because you can hear the sound of the contact in a way in an empty stadium that you can't not. I'm like unusually pro referee perhaps of a media person. My uncle was a career referee and official in basketball and baseball, so I've always been on team referee. I'd be interested. I'm just really interested to see how they officiate this Bundesliga behind closed doors.
Should be interesting. Well, we already reviewed the Bundesliga a little bit. We're going to place a graphic to show the table and what it currently sits at. I think, interestingly enough, one team that played today, Werder Bremen, who lost, currently sit at 17th. A team that I would say going into the season didn't expect themselves to be there. Do either of you two have a comment on them?
Yeah, I think that's obviously really disappointing for them. This match in particular was a bit of a downer, and especially for American soccer fans, where Josh Sargent probably turned down a few different offers to play at Werder Bremen, where he'd get significant minutes. But him going down is a bit of a bummer, I think, especially because of how exciting a prospect he is at the striker position. But yeah, that's about it for that.
Yeah, I mean, by no means are they locked and loaded to go down into the second division, but certainly frightening times, and frightening times for players who probably didn't think that they're going to be in this situation. You mentioned Josh Sargent. Obviously, there are tons of American talents in the Bundesliga. Ane, do you want to go over a few more that you're excited about?
Yeah, sure. So we had a handful of players playing in these past couple of days in the Bundesliga that are American. I think there has been kind of a history of young Americans getting significant minutes in the Bundesliga over the past several years. I think the most obvious example of that, or the success story, would be Christian Pulisic, who's gone from, Dortmund Academy to a Dortmund regular starter to now playing at Chelsea. Another kind of name that came up in the same light as Pulisic did is Weston McKennie. I don't think he has kind of been as exciting as he was at the beginning, but he played 90 minutes in their loss to their rivals, in Schalke's loss to their rivals Dortmund, 4-0. He's an exciting player, though, a central midfielder, and he's playing at a very high level, and he gets consistent minutes at Schalke, which is the most important thing. I already mentioned Josh Sargent. He played about 20 minutes in their loss to Leverkusen 4-1. Like you said, relegation seems all but certain. They have 18 points, 9 points from safety, and not a lot of time left to make up that ground. So that's a bummer, I think, for American sports fans. But if he does stay at Werder Bremen, I think he'll have a big opportunity to make a positive impact next year in the two Bundesliga.
Or perhaps move. I think, sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to talk about Sargent a little bit more. There was an interesting tweet that Matt Doyle 76 put up today. He said that he thinks that Sargent's career would be further along right now and on a better trajectory if he signed with Sporting KC ahead of the 2017 season. Obviously, he's not in a good position right now, but this is a controversial tweet. Do you two have any comments on that?
I want to hear Colin's take on this one first.
It's interesting because MLS, or the Bundesliga, has been a great environment for young players of all nationalities. It's not just the young Americans. I mean, the Germans produce excellent German young players through their own leagues. French, Italians, they all know that the Bundesliga is a place that will absolutely reward a young player if they're doing well. So in some ways, it's very ideal, and the footballing infrastructure there is very advanced, not just in terms of like the physical facilities, but the coaching and technical levels, and the culture and environment is very competitive. So I would generally lean towards saying that you would rather be in the Bundesliga than in the MLS, where, to be honest, there's actually kind of a hesitance to play younger players, historically in particular, before the homegrown rule in particular. Because there was always a focus on winning now. And I think that there was a relatively conservative old school culture amongst coaches where they'd rather have seasoned veterans playing their blue collar style rather than nurturing their young. in particular because they can't sell them off due to league rules. They can't get the same kind of premium that they can in other countries. So, Ajax of Amsterdam, the shirt that I'm wearing right now, they produce, generations of young players because it actually makes them a profit. And so I think that dynamics in MLS are not as good in general. However, for his specific case, I think if you want a striker to get lots of minutes as a young guy, and there is an MLS situation that will allow him to do so, SKC is one of those places that would have done so. They were looking for a striker at the time, and so if you think minutes are the way you develop, yeah, I guess that's the right way to go. But I guess I'm more inclined to think that the infrastructure is probably where the development happens, and so I'm actually okay with him being in Germany. And the two Bundesliga is a perfectly good league, so it's not a bad place to be. So I think he's still 19, so I would not be super worried.
Yeah.
Definitely. I tend to agree with you on that. I'd say if it was somewhere in the MLS that we had to have him end up, Sporting KC, not the worst place, play an attacking brand of football, press high up the pitch. Peter Vermees is obviously a great manager, and he would have probably bagged a lot of goals in that position at this level. But I agree. I think the Bundesliga is definitely the best place for him to be at that point in his career, and he'll still have some great opportunities to make his way up.
I mean, if I'm gonna pitch in with my own Americans to watch, I have a serious sleeper pick for you guys, actually from the second Bundesliga, which is also restarting if you can find a stream to see them, which is 96 Hannover is the team that Steve Cherundolo used to play for most of his career, maybe even entire career, I don't remember. But they have Sebastian Soto is the striker on that team. And he's a young guy, kind of, I think he's about Sargent's age, not quite as advanced and developed, but I watched him in the youth national teams a couple times, and I think he might be an interesting guy to watch as well. On the other end of the spectrum of a higher profile player, you can't forget that Zach Steffen is in the Bundesliga right now. He's injured, so he's not playing for Fortuna Düsseldorf, but he's the US's number one, and he's the number one for a reason. So if he comes back into form or into fitness, that it would be exciting to watch him too.
Yeah, I think when he returns, that'll be another kind of big name to watch out on. One name that isn't necessarily a young prospect, but is an interesting one to bring up is Timothy Chandler. Dom, you and I were talking about this. Again, he's not exactly a young prospect, but he's been pretty important for Frankfurt this year. He transitioned from the right back position, which we're kind of used to him playing at the U.S. men's national team, into more of a winger role. At one point in February, he was actually just behind Erling Haaland of Dortmund for the most goals scored in the Bundesliga in 2020. Since then, he's calmed down a little bit, but I think that's an interesting tidbit, especially because Timothy Chandler, he's kind of had a mixed bag of support in terms of his time with the U.S. men's national team.
Yeah, no, I mean, you said it perfectly. And I think the weird thing was Timothy Chandler was usually viewed as a fullback for both Frankfurt and for both the national team. But in recent times, he's been moved up to right wing. And he's not the most pacey player in the world. He's not the most technical player in the world, but clearly something was right in February. And whether this was a circumstance that isn't going to be repeated or not, who knows? But yeah, at one point he was up there scoring 3 goals in 4 games and contributing a lot to the Frankfurt team.
For what it's worth, I did get a certain amount of cover in on the U.S. national teams when I was a full-time reporter, and it did seem to me that in the locker room when they complained about the German-American players who didn't really give much of a crap about the U.S. national team, Timmy Chandler was always number one on that list. And so I think that his poor reputation with the national team was kind of well earned. And whereas some of the other German Americans were 100% bought in, Jermaine Jones, for example. But Timmy Chandler always kind of had a reputation as being a guy who was not applying himself fully to it. He's a talented guy. And I think that in modern football, you see, when every coach in their first press conference will say, we defend with 11 and we attack with 11, right? That is like such a cliche at this point. And I think it's led to fullbacks who look like wingers, and wingers, if depending on the system you're playing, you'd have a lot of wingers or a lot of forwards who are doing a lot of pressing and are prized for those types of attributes and not just the traditional twinkle toes dribbling. They kind of, managers want guys who can impact both sides of the game at every position now.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree, for sure. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention Giovanni Reyna, who plays for Dortmund. Just wrapping up this segment, he was scheduled to get his first Bundesliga start. Obviously, he scored an absolute banger during his Champions League start. But unfortunately, during warmups, he got injured and didn't play. It's really unknown whether he will be back next week or whether he'll be back next month. But that is one that kind of hurts, because American fans were really, really excited on Giovanni Reyna. They obviously still are very excited, but I'm sure many people were looking to watch him this weekend.
We're spoiled for talent, boys. We haven't had this since the early 2000s with Dempsey, Beasley, and Donovan all coming through at the same time.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Speaking of American players, we should talk a little bit about the MLS and the state that the league is in. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom said that sports maybe can return at the beginning of June in front of no fans. This is something that might affect the San Jose Earthquakes and the league as a whole. But the MLS and Gavin Newsom are by no means on the same page. The MLS said that they have extended its banning of group training through Monday, June 1st, saying that the league isn't ready to take that next big step forward. So me personally, I don't see the MLS returning. I don't see the Quakes returning at the beginning of June, as Governor Newsom suggests.
It's going to take a couple weeks for them to get near fitness. And the thing that all American leagues are talking about right now is not just, like what is safe, but they're also talking about what is fair, because if teams are located in jurisdictions that open up earlier than others and they can have full workouts, then that gives them a huge advantage in terms of getting back into shape for the season. So I think you're right. I think it's going to take a while, because you have to not just get to the point of safety, but you actually have to get to the point of safety for the entire 50 states, and then start that kind of process opening back up.
Yeah, and I think with MLS teams as well, as most of these teams, if not all, don't have fully dedicated charter flights yet.
Yep.
So how they solve that problem is going to be another question that's going to be accelerated. There have been suggestions of just having everyone come to a place like Orlando or Arizona and play all the games there. There was a rumor of that happening, and that's certainly been discussed with the MLB and the NBA as well. I think that would be interesting, but that's another thing that opens up a whole other set of questions. Where do the families go? How long is this going to last? What kind of tournament are they going to play? Things like that.
Yeah.
Honestly, sorry, go ahead, Dom.
I was going to say, to address your point, Colin, there have been rumors within the MLS that they are actually considering bringing all teams to Orlando to train in isolation before resuming play. So, Ane, you mentioned that all the games, all the matches might be played in Florida or in Arizona to perhaps mitigate the problem of some teams training and some teams not. They're actually considering bringing everyone before even league starts again.
Yeah, I don't think it's too much inside baseball of me to suggest that one of the reasons why Orlando is such a high priority is Orlando has a bunch of Disney resorts that have a lot of capacity to put people up, and the Disney company owns ESPN, which is one of the broadcasters of MLS and other leagues as well. I would not be surprised to see that be a fairly explicit tie-in when they're doing this. I mean, look, I'm interested in the money side of things just in general, and I work in finance now. I think that is the most interesting thing about this, because unlike football or the NFL or certain other American leagues and European soccer leagues, TV is not a huge portion of MLS revenue.
No.
And the reason to play games behind closed doors, honestly, is television, because they basically want to get their TV contracts paid out so that they're not, liable for any losses. And they want to recoup as much revenue as they can get through advertising and whatnot. MLS has actually a really meager contract with Fox Sports, ESPN, and their other local broadcasters, Univision. I just don't see a lot of economic upside in it for them. But MLS is, a league that can't deal with a season of lost revenue. They're not rich enough yet to, the NBA, honestly, most of those owners could just write a check and ride out this entire 2020 season.
Mm-hmm.
MLS has a couple of very wealthy owners, but not 100% of the teams have that type of cushion, and the owners don't necessarily have the appetite to sink that level of
Yeah.
money. I would say that the only way it would make sense is if they can somehow get a negotiated TV deal for this year and say, hey, ESPN, we will put ourselves up in the Disney resorts that you want us to do to help float this other wing of your company that's doing very poorly right now because no one's traveling. We will, do this season behind closed doors thing, but we need a contract that just applies to this year, because we've seen the TV ratings that German soccer has gotten. We've seen the TV ratings that Korean baseball has gotten on ESPN. If they can get some sort of deal in this year, because I think that their master contract for television isn't up until 2022, then it might make sense. But for right now, the in-game receipts, the stadium receipts, both from the tickets themselves, but the concessions and all that other stuff, that's a huge part of revenue. And I don't think that any of the teams will be able to do very well without it.
Well, let's hope that let's hope that Disney and ESPN and MLS are all watching this stream and we get this thing figured out. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to extend my gratitude for Colin to being our first guest, and hopefully we can have you back on later on the show.
Much appreciated, boys. It's a pleasure.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Make sure to follow Colin Entire on Twitter. Obviously, our football podcast is Football PHI. We are the Football Philosophers, and we're looking forward to being with you next time. Thank you.